Beyond the Gates spoilers tease that Randy returns and agrees to help Doug take revenge on Joey. The story begins with Doug discovering the ultimate betrayal, a wound deeper than any physical scar could ever leave. He had long suspected Joey of circling his life like a vulture, waiting for the moment of weakness to strike, but he had never anticipated Vanessa to be complicit in his destruction. One evening, arriving home earlier than expected, Doug opened the bedroom door only to find his wife entangled with Joey. The sight burned into his mind like a searing brand. He froze, paralyzed by the image of two people he trusted most sharing the most intimate of acts. Joey's grin, cold and triumphant, was almost worse than the physical act itself. Doug staggered backward, his heart pounding, his vision swimming. It wasn't just infidelity, it was humiliation, calculated and sharpened into a weapon. Doug's world collapsed in that instant. Vanessa's betrayal was something his mind refused to process. How could she, the woman who once promised loyalty and love, climb into the very bed of the man who had systematically sabotaged Doug's reputation, his business ventures, his friendships? Doug wanted to scream, to lash out, to tear the walls apart. But all that emerged was silence and the silent fracture of his heart. He left the room without a word, the weight of the discovery pressing on him like chains. Later, when the dust settled enough for him to confront her, Doug was met with more than just the pain of infidelity. Vanessa confessed, in a voice trembling with both guilt and justification, that she had allowed Joey to funnel money through her business. She claimed it was under pressure, that Joey's manipulative threats had cornered her. But Doug saw through her words. She hadn't only betrayed him physically, she had compromised their livelihood, allowed Joey to stain her enterprise with dirty money. The carefully laid revenge scheme that Doug and Randy had plotted was now tangled and weakened. Joey had inserted himself into every crevice of Doug's life, bedroom, business, and now, the fragile network of loyalty between allies. Doug's rage deepened with every revelation. Randy, who had returned after years of keeping his distance, urged Doug to keep focus. Randy had always been the sharper mind between them, cautious yet truthless when the time demanded. He warned Doug not to let emotions cloud the mission. Yet Doug's feelings were too raw to compartmentalize. Vanessa, visibly shaken by the direction things were heading, tried desperately to intervene. One night, she confronted Doug, her voice cracking with fear and regret. She begged him to abandon his plan for revenge, insisting that Joey was too dangerous, too unpredictable. "You can't win against him," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "You're walking into a trap you'll never escape." But instead of calming him, her words ignited a deeper fire in Doug. Her attempt to shield him only reinforced the notion that Joey was untouchable. Doug refused to live under that shadow. If Joey could steal his wife, corrupt his business, and walk away unscathed, then Doug had already lost his identity. Revenge was no longer about evening the scales, it was about reclaiming his dignity, his place in a world that Joey thought he owned. Randy recognized this determination and, after a long silence, agreed to continue the path with him. The plan escalated. Doug arranged a meeting with Joey under the guise of settling their outstanding debts. He lured Joey into thinking this was a peace offering, a surrender. At the arranged spot, a dimly lit bar on the outskirts of town where whispers traveled faster than gunshots, Doug waited nervously. When Joey finally arrived, flanked by his presence and arrogance, Doug's heart raced. He rehearsed the lines in his head, the tone of false humility he had to adopt to make Joey believe he was folding. But when the moment came, Doug could not mask his contempt. His voice betrayed the venom he held, and Joey quickly sensed the deceit. Rage flared in Joey's eyes. With a sudden motion, he struck Doug across the face. The sound of the slap echoed in the bar, sharp and humiliating. Doug stumbled, his cheek burning with pain, his pride bruised further. Joey leaned in, his voice a low growl, warning him never to think he could deceive him again. And then the atmosphere shifted. From behind Joey, a masked figure emerged, the gleam of a gun glinting under the dim lights. The muzzle pressed against Joey's back, the voice cold and commanding as it ordered him to transfer money into a mysterious account. For a moment, Joey was caught off guard. His instincts told him this was more than a setup, this was betrayal from within. His eyes darted between Doug and the masked figure, calculating, processing. But Joey was not a man who folded under pressure. His cunning nature flared to life, and he barked out a threat at Doug. If Doug ever tried a stunt like this again, he swore he would erase not just Doug, but the fragile new wife Doug had clung to after Vanessa's crumbling loyalty. The venom in his tone was enough to paralyze Doug with dread. Then recognition sparked in Joey's gaze. The way the masked man stood, the familiar rhythm of his breath, it all clicked. "Randy," Joey snarled, his voice rising in fury. "You think you can pull this pathetic stunt on me?" The mask might have covered his face, but Joey knew his old lieutenant too well. The betrayal cut both ways now. Joey had once relied on Randy as a right-hand enforcer, a man who carried out his most brutal commands without hesitation. And yet here he was, weapon drawn, siding with Doug. Joey roared with anger, spitting curses at Randy, demanding he stand down or risk watching his own family perish. The threat was not idle. Joey had connections, men willing to do unspeakable things at his signal. Randy hesitated only briefly. His eyes met Doug's, and in that silent exchange, years of camaraderie, mistakes, and unfinished business spoke louder than words. Randy lowered his weapon ever so slightly, but his resolve did not waver. He knew Joey's patterns, his manipulations. He also knew that the only way to ever be free was to outplay Joey at his own game. Yet the game had just grown more complicated. Joey's mention of Randy's family shifted the battlefield. Doug realized in that moment that Joey wasn't simply targeting him anymore. Joey was extending his venom to anyone who dared oppose him. Randy was no longer just an ally, he was now as deeply entangled in Joey's web as Doug. Their vendetta had transformed from a personal grudge into a life-or-death struggle where the cost of failure would not just be their pride, but the people they loved most. Doug staggered out of the meeting shaken, his face swollen from Joey's blow, his mind racing with Joey's threats. Randy followed, silent at first, his thoughts heavy with the weight of Joey's reminder about his family. Doug's thirst for revenge had now pulled Randy into a storm where personal sacrifices were inevitable. And yet, despite the danger, the two men shared the same unspoken conclusion: retreat was no longer an option. The following nights stretched with tension. Doug and Randy pored over possibilities, mapping out Joey's habits, connections, and weak points. Joey was ruthless, but no man was invincible. Randy reminded Doug of Joey's overconfidence, as arrogance often blinded him to subtle traps. They began to discuss ways to turn Joey's network against him, exploiting cracks in his empire. But the shadows grew longer. Vanessa, though torn with guilt and fear, watched Doug spiral deeper into his obsession. She tried once more to intervene, pleading with Randy directly this time. She begged him to abandon Doug's cause, arguing that Joey would crush them both and leave nothing but ruins in their wake. Randy, however, was resolute. "It's not about revenge anymore," he told her quietly. "It's about survival. If we don't stop him, he'll keep bleeding us dry until there's nothing left." Her words fell on deaf ears, her tears going unnoticed. Joey had made himself into a monster who thrived on fear, and now the men he once manipulated were uniting to dismantle him. The storm was coming, and though Doug and Randy knew the odds were stacked against them, the fire of vengeance refused to be extinguished. They would not wait to be hunted. This was the beginning of their war, a war that would not only test their loyalty but force them to gamble everything, even the lives tethered to their own. Doug's resolve hardened in the days that followed the confrontation. The sting on his cheek from Joey's handprint had long faded, but the humiliation lingered in his bones like a reminder of failure. Joey's threats echoed in his mind, each word carving into him. He replayed them late at night when sleep refused to come. He saw Vanessa's face every time, not as the woman he once trusted but as the person who had cracked the fortress of his world wide open, leaving him exposed. He thought about Randy, about the moment his friend had stood behind Joey with a gun, and about the fear that had flickered in Randy's eyes when Joey spoke of his family. Fear was contagious, but Doug refused to let it rule him anymore. Randy, however, carried that fear like a weight around his neck. He was no stranger to Joey's cruelty. He had seen firsthand what Joey did to those who crossed him, men who thought they could slip away quietly only to vanish without trace. Randy remembered jobs where he had carried out Joey's orders, ruthless and efficient, never questioning because the alternative was worse. Joey didn't just kill, he dismantled. He made examples out of people so thoroughly that even whispers of defiance were crushed before they could spread. Now, standing on the opposite side, Randy understood the scale of what they were about to attempt. The two of them began to strategize with the precision of men who had nothing left to lose. Doug's obsession fueled their momentum, but Randy's experience gave their plan shape. They studied Joey's laundering operations, tracing the channels of money that Vanessa had unwillingly opened to him. They saw patterns in the transfers, names of shell companies, hints of partners who didn't realize they were disposable. Randy explained that Joey's empire wasn't built on brute force alone. It thrived because of trust and fear working in tandem. If they could disrupt one, the other would collapse like rotting beams under a house. But Joey was already moving. He had men tailing Doug, watching his every step. He tightened his grip on Vanessa's business, ensuring that she remained entangled in his schemes. And most dangerously of all, he began circling Randy's family, his wife and young daughter, reminding him with subtle visits, silent calls, and unmarked cars parked outside his home that they were never out of reach. Randy hid these threats from Doug, knowing his friend would act recklessly if he discovered how close Joey was pressing. Vanessa's guilt grew unbearable. She approached Doug again, desperate to undo what she had unleashed. Her voice trembled as she admitted how Joey had cornered her, how she had thought aligning with him was the only way to keep her business afloat when financial pressures mounted. But Doug had no sympathy left. He listened with a cold stare, his silence heavier than words. When she begged him to stop before Joey destroyed them both, he laughed bitterly. "He already has," Doug said. "There's nothing left for him to take from me that he hasn't already stolen." The divide between them was absolute. Vanessa realized then that her pleas were useless. Doug wasn't fighting for her anymore, he was fighting for his own sense of justice, or perhaps just the illusion of it. She retreated, torn between fear for him and fear of Joey's retribution if she defied him again. Meanwhile, Randy devised a plan to bait Joey into a trap that would exploit his arrogance. They spread rumors through back channels that one of Joey's closest associates had been skimming money from the laundering scheme. Joey's empire thrived on fear, but paranoia was its hidden weakness. He trusted few, and when trust cracked, violence followed. Randy knew that if Joey began to doubt the loyalty of his inner circle, the cracks would spread faster than either of them could carve. But setting the trap meant exposing themselves. Doug volunteered without hesitation. He wanted to face Joey again, not as a broken man begging for scraps, but as the one pulling strings. Randy warned him of the risks if Joey sensed deception. Doug's life would end before anyone could blink. But Doug's answer was simple: better to die fighting him than live another day in his shadow. The confrontation came sooner than expected. Joey, always perceptive, caught wind of whispers about betrayal among his men. His temper flared, and instead of waiting for confirmation, he set out to confirm it himself. He cornered Doug in an abandoned warehouse, his rage boiling just beneath the surface. Two of Joey's enforcers pinned Doug against the wall while Joey's voice sliced through the air like a knife. "You think you can turn my people against me? You think you can spread poison in my house?" Doug, despite the bruises already forming on his face, smiled through the pain. "Maybe your house was rotten before I even touched it," he spat. His defiance enraged Joey further, and he struck him again. But Doug's words had planted the seed. Joey was ruthless, but he was also suspicious, and suspicion grew quickly in his world. Randy had anticipated this reaction. From the shadows, he moved carefully, waiting for the right moment. He had arranged for one of Joey's own men, already disgruntled with the low share of profits he received, to feed false evidence into Joey's paranoia. The enforcer slipped the information at just the right moment, making Joey believe that betrayal wasn't just a rumor but a reality. What followed was chaos. Joey's wrath turned inward. He began questioning his men, shouting threats, demanding loyalty oaths. The trust that had once held his empire together now fractured into fear of being labeled a traitor. Randy watched it unfold with grim satisfaction. Doug, though bloodied, saw the shift too. For the first time, Joey wasn't entirely in control. But victory was not yet theirs. Joey may have doubted his inner circle, But his fury at Doug only grew. He decided that fear alone wasn't enough, needed to make an example of Doug publicly, in a way that would silence all whispers of rebellion. He announced that Doug would pay with his life, and he would do so in a manner that left no question about Joey's dominance. Randy realized then that their window was closing. If Joey succeeded in making Doug his public spectacle, not only would Doug be gone, but Randy's family would become the next leverage Joey used. The only option left was to strike harder, faster, and risk everything. The plan shifted from disruption to annihilation. Randy gathered what little remained of his contacts, men who had once served Joey but had been discarded. These were bitter, broken men, but bitterness was a powerful weapon when sharpened by desperation. Together, they formed a fragile alliance, united by the single goal of seeing Joey fall. Vanessa, hearing whispers of this final plan, faced the most difficult choice of her life. She knew Joey would destroy Doug if she did nothing, but she also knew that standing against Joey could mean her own death. She wrestled with her conscience, torn between her complicity in Joey's rise and the faint hope of redemption. In the end, she decided that silence was no longer an option. She approached Randy secretly, offering information about Joey's laundering operations that she had tried to bury out of fear. It was a small act, but it was enough to give them an edge. Randy accepted the information but warned her that choosing this side meant there was no going back. Vanessa nodded, her face pale but resolute. She had already lost Doug's trust, but perhaps she could salvage her own soul by ensuring Joey's downfall. The stage was set for a confrontation that would tear apart everything Joey had built. Doug, Randy, and the fractured alliance of discarded men prepared for the battle ahead, knowing that Joey would not go quietly. He was a predator, and predators fought hardest when cornered. The air grew heavy with tension as the final moves were made. Doug, once broken and humiliated, stood at the edge of something far larger than revenge. Randy, bound by a loyalty and the desperate need to protect his family, steeled himself for the bloodshed to come. Vanessa, haunted by the choices that had led them here, braced herself for the reckoning. And Joey, still towering in his own arrogance, prepared to unleash the full weight of his wrath, unaware that the ground beneath him was already cracking. The war for survival was no longer a question of if, but when and who would be left standing once the dust settled. The night of reckoning arrived with an uneasy stillness, the kind of silence that often comes before a storm. Doug felt it in his chest, the tight coil of adrenaline as he sat in the dark, waiting for Randy's signal. He knew there was no turning back now. The betrayals, the humiliations, the threats every step had led to this moment. Joey had stripped him bare, and the only way forward was through fire. Randy, meanwhile, was split in two. On one side was loyalty to Doug, a bond that had grown sharper in the crucible of Joey's cruelty. On the other was the haunting image of his wife and daughter, fragile lives Joey had dangled like bait. He tightened the grip on his weapon, trying to bury the fear. Tonight, hesitation would mean death. Joey entered the warehouse chosen for the final confrontation with the swagger of a man who believed he owned the night. Two guards flanked him, each carrying the weight of years of loyalty and bloodshed. His eyes scanned the room, predatory and unyielding. When he spotted Doug and Randy, a cruel smile spread across his face. "So this is it?" Joey sneered. "Two broken men thinking they can topple me? You should have run when you had the chance." Doug stepped forward, battered but unflinching. "You've taken everything from me. You think you're untouchable, but tonight we see what happens when the untouchable finally bleeds." The tension snapped like a gunshot. One of Joey's guards moved, but Randy was faster, putting him down with a single, decisive strike. Chaos erupted, bullets ripping through the air, shadows twisting as the warehouse became a battlefield. Doug dove behind cover, returning fire with reckless determination. Joey, furious and calculating, used the chaos to his advantage, circling like a predator looking for the opening to strike. Vanessa appeared in the midst of the storm, her presence both unexpected and pivotal. She had followed them, unable to stay away from the final act of destruction she had helped set in motion. She shouted Joey's name, her voice cutting through the noise. For a split second, Joey faltered. He turned, his expression shifting between rage and recognition. It was the hesitation Doug had been waiting for. He surged from cover, tackling Joey to the ground. The two men grappled, fists flying, years of hatred poured into every strike. Joey was stronger, fueled by pure rage, but Doug's desperation gave him a different kind of strength. He fought like a man with nothing left to lose. Randy dispatched the last guard and turned his weapon toward Joey, but his hands shook. Joey had once been his master, his shadow, the man who had shaped the darker parts of him. Pulling the trigger felt like betraying a piece of himself, even if that piece was poisoned. Vanessa, sensing Randy's hesitation, picked up a fallen weapon and leveled it at Joey herself. Her eyes were wet with tears, but her voice was steady. "End this, Doug," she said. Doug pinned Joey, his knuckles raw from the fight. Joey spat blood, his grin unbroken even in defeat. "You think killing me will set you free? I am the air you breathe, the ground you walk on. Even if I fall, others will rise. You'll never escape me." Doug stared into Joey's eyes and realized there was truth in his words. Joey's empire was built on fear, but fear didn't die with one man. It spread, it infected. The only way to truly win was to sever the chain completely. He looked to Randy, then to Vanessa. Both of them were waiting, broken in their own ways but tied to him by the same need for closure. The decision crystallized in his mind. Doug raised the weapon, his hands steady. "You're wrong," he said quietly. "Freedom isn't given, it's taken." And with that, he pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed through the warehouse, final and unyielding. Joey's body slumped, the life gone from his eyes. For the first time, the room was silent, not the silence of fear, but of an empire cracking apart. Randy dropped his weapon, his shoulders sagging under the weight of what they had done. His family was still in danger, but with Joey gone, the threat had shifted. There would be others who tried to fill the void, but none with Joey's grip. Tonight, at least, his daughter would sleep without a shadow looming over her bed. Vanessa fell to her knees, tears spilling freely. She had thought Joey indestructible, a force of nature. Seeing him broken and lifeless shattered something in her as well. She had lost Doug long before this night, but watching him reclaim his dignity ignited a strange mix of grief and relief in her heart. Doug stood over Joey's body, breathing heavily, the weight of years finally lifting. He didn't feel triumph. There was no victory in blood, only survival. But for the first time since his life had unraveled, he felt free of Joey's chains. As dawn crept through the broken windows of the warehouse, the three of them stood in silence. They had survived, but survival came with scars. Doug knew his life would never return to what it once was. Vanessa knew forgiveness was beyond her reach. Randy knew danger still lurked at the edges of his family's safety. But they also knew that Joey's reign of fear had ended, and that was enough to begin again. They left the warehouse separately, each walking into a different kind of future. Doug into the unknown, carrying his scars as proof that even the weakest man can stand against a monster. Randy back to his family, clutching the fragile hope that his choices had bought them peace. Vanessa into the shadows, seeking redemption in a world where her name was forever tied to betrayal. Behind them, Joey's body lay in silence, the empire he built collapsing piece by piece. The predator had fallen, and with him, the gates of fear that had trapped them all finally opened.